The autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing the morning's correspondence. His reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose, and the weight of the crown seemed heavier today than usual. The stack of letters before him contained the usual mixture of state business, charitable requests, and personal matters that required his attention. Among the cream-colored envelopes was one that bore the distinctive handwriting he had come to recognize over the years. It was from Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, and the formal tone of the address suggested this was no casual family note. Charles set down his fountain pen and carefully opened the envelope, unaware that the contents would soon create ripples throughout the entire royal household. The letter began cordially enough, with Annabel expressing her gratitude for the kindness the royal family had shown to her and her extended family since Charles and Camilla's marriage. She wrote about how honored they felt to be connected to the monarchy and how they had always respected the boundaries and protocols that came with such a position. However, as Charles read further, the true purpose of the letter became clear. Annabel was writing on behalf of Camilla's youngest nephew, Thomas, who had recently graduated from university with a degree in architecture. The young man had been struggling to find meaningful employment in his field, and despite his qualifications and enthusiasm, doors seemed to close whenever potential employers learned of his royal connections. Some feared the media attention that might follow, while others worried about the protocols involved in hiring someone so closely related to the queen consort. The letter went on to explain that Thomas had always been passionate about historic preservation, particularly the restoration of ancient buildings and castles. He had written his thesis on medieval architecture and had interned with several prestigious firms during his studies. His professors had praised his work, and his portfolio demonstrated genuine talent and dedication to his craft. However, the reality of finding employment in a competitive field while carrying the weight of royal association had proven more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Annabel's request was carefully worded but clear. She was asking if Charles might consider creating a position within the royal household for Thomas, perhaps working with the team responsible for maintaining the various royal residences. She emphasized that this was not about seeking special treatment or an easy path for her nephew, but rather about providing him with an opportunity to prove himself in an environment where his family connections would be understood and managed appropriately. The letter detailed Thomas's qualifications extensively. He had spent summers working with local craftsmen, learning traditional building techniques that were becoming increasingly rare. His understanding of historical construction methods was impressive for someone so young, and he had already published several articles in architectural journals about the importance of preserving Britain's historic buildings. Annabel painted a picture of a young man who was genuinely passionate about his work and eager to contribute meaningfully to the preservation of the nation's architectural heritage. As Charles read, he could sense the careful balance Annabel was trying to strike. She was clearly proud of her nephew's achievements and frustrated by the obstacles he was facing. Yet she was also acutely aware of the delicate position she was putting Charles in by making such a request. The letter acknowledged the potential complications and assured Charles that Thomas would understand completely if such an arrangement was not possible. Charles set the letter down and gazed out at the rain-soaked gardens. He had always prided himself on treating Camilla's family with warmth and respect, understanding how difficult it could be for civilians to navigate the complex world of royal protocol. When he and Camilla had married, he had made it clear that he welcomed her children and extended family into his life, not just as in-laws, but as people he genuinely cared about. The request, however, touched on one of the most sensitive aspects of royal life: the careful balance between personal relationships and public duty. Every decision Charles made was scrutinized, every appointment analyzed for signs of favoritism or inappropriate influence. The press would undoubtedly have opinions about any member of Camilla's family being given a position within the royal household, regardless of their qualifications. Charles had spent decades watching how his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had handled similar situations. She had maintained strict boundaries when it came to family members seeking positions or favors, understanding that the integrity of the monarchy depended on the perception that it operated above personal interests. Yet Charles also remembered instances where talented individuals had been overlooked or underutilized because of family connections, and he wondered if such rigid adherence to protocol sometimes came at too high a cost. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as Charles contemplated the implications of Annabel's request. Thomas Parker Bowles, Camilla's nephew, was by all accounts a bright and capable young man who deserved the chance to build a career based on his merits. Yet the very act of considering him for a royal position would inevitably invite questions about whether talent or family connections were the determining factor. Charles thought about his own sons and how they had navigated similar challenges. William and Harry had both faced scrutiny about their career choices, with critics questioning whether their military commissions and charitable positions were earned or simply granted because of their birth. The difference, of course, was that they were born into the royal family, and their futures were always destined to be intertwined with the monarchy. Thomas, on the other hand, had been thrust into this world through marriage and circumstance. The king's private secretary knocked softly on the door, reminding Charles that his next appointment was waiting. As he prepared to set the letter aside, Charles made a mental note to discuss the matter with Camilla that evening. Whatever decision he made would affect not only Thomas's future but also his relationship with Camilla's family and the public's perception of how he conducted royal business. That evening, Charles found Camilla in the blue drawing room, quietly reading correspondence from her various charitable organizations. The soft glow of the table lamps cast a warm light across her face as she worked, and Charles felt a familiar sense of comfort in their shared domestic routine. After decades of navigating the complexities of their relationship under public scrutiny, these quiet moments together had become precious to both of them. Charles approached carefully, carrying Annabelle's letter in his hand. He had spent much of the afternoon thinking about how to broach the subject, knowing that Camilla would be torn between her loyalty to her family and her understanding of royal protocol. Their marriage had required both of them to make significant adjustments, but perhaps none more challenging than learning to balance family obligations with constitutional responsibilities. Camilla looked up as Charles settled into the chair beside her, immediately noticing the serious expression on his face. After years of marriage, she had learned to read his moods with remarkable accuracy, and something about his demeanor tonight suggested that whatever was troubling him involved more than the usual state business. She set aside her own papers and gave him her full attention, waiting for him to share what was clearly weighing heavily on his mind. Charles handed her the letter without preamble, watching her face carefully as she read. He saw the initial surprise give way to understanding, then concern, and finally, what looked like resignation. When she finished reading, Camilla folded the letter carefully and placed it on the small table between their chairs. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, both understanding the complexity of the situation that Annabelle had presented to them. Camilla was the first to break the silence, her voice quiet but steady. She acknowledged that she had been aware of Thomas's struggles to find suitable employment, though she hadn't realized how significantly his royal connections were affecting his prospects. She spoke with obvious affection about her nephew, describing him as a thoughtful and dedicated young man who had always been passionate about architecture and historical preservation. She recalled visiting him during his university years and being impressed by his knowledge and enthusiasm for his studies. Thomas had shown her detailed drawings of medieval building techniques and had spoken eloquently about the importance of preserving Britain's architectural heritage for future generations. His professors had consistently praised his work, and his final project had received top honors from the university's architecture department. However, Camilla also expressed her deep concern about the position Annabelle's request had placed them in. She understood better than most how carefully royal appointments were scrutinized and how quickly accusations of favoritism could arise. Since becoming queen consort, she had been acutely aware of the need to avoid any appearance of using her position to benefit her family members. Every decision she made, every public appearance, every charitable patronage was analyzed for signs of inappropriate influence or self-interest. Charles listened intently as Camilla shared her perspective, appreciating her understanding of the broader implications beyond the immediate family considerations. She spoke about the conversations she had had with her children and extended family about the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries and not expecting special treatment because of her marriage to the king. These had been difficult conversations, requiring family members to understand that love and support did not automatically translate into professional opportunities. The discussion revealed the emotional toll that royal life sometimes took on family relationships. Camilla described feeling helpless when she watched her family members face unique challenges because of their association with the monarchy. Job prospects, social relationships, and even simple daily activities could become complicated by the constant awareness of royal connections. She had seen how her own children had learned to navigate these complexities, but Watching the younger generation like Thomas face similar obstacles was particularly difficult. Charles expressed his own internal struggle with the request. On one hand, he genuinely wanted to support Camilla's family and help a talented young man find meaningful work in his chosen field. Thomas's qualifications appeared genuine, and the royal household did indeed have ongoing needs for skilled professionals in architecture and historic preservation. The various royal residences required constant maintenance and careful restoration work, often calling for expertise in traditional building methods and historical accuracy. On the other hand, Charles was acutely aware of his constitutional responsibilities and the need to maintain public trust in the monarchy's integrity. Every appointment within the royal household was a matter of public record, and the press would undoubtedly scrutinize any decision to hire a member of Camilla's family. Even if Thomas was genuinely the best candidate for a position, the public perception might be that family connections had influenced the decision. The conversation revealed deeper questions about the nature of modern monarchy and the balance between personal relationships and public duty. Charles spoke about the weight of knowing that his decisions affected not only the immediate family, but also the institution of the monarchy itself. Every choice had to be considered not just for its immediate impact, but for how it would be perceived by the public, Parliament, and future generations. Camilla shared her own struggles with similar questions since becoming queen consort. She described the constant awareness of being watched and judged, and how this affected her interactions with her own family members. Simple gestures of support or affection could be misinterpreted as attempts to gain influence or special treatment. The natural desire to help and protect family members had to be balanced against the need to maintain appropriate boundaries and public trust. As the evening wore on, both Charles and Camilla found themselves discussing broader themes about family, duty, and the sacrifices required by royal life. They talked about the young people in their extended families who were trying to build independent careers while carrying the weight of royal associations. These conversations highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by modern royalty in an era of intense media scrutiny and public accountability. The discussion also touched on their hopes for how the monarchy might evolve to better balance these competing demands. Both Charles and Camilla recognized that rigid adherence to traditional protocols might sometimes prevent talented individuals from contributing meaningfully to royal work, while too much flexibility could undermine public confidence in the institution's integrity. Finding the right balance required careful consideration of each situation and its broader implications. The following morning brought a scheduled meeting with Charles's senior advisors, including his private secretary, the keeper of the privy purse, and several other key members of his household staff. These regular briefings typically covered upcoming engagements, policy matters, and various administrative issues requiring the king's attention. However, Charles had decided to raise the matter of Annabelle's request, knowing that such a decision could not be made in isolation from his broader constitutional responsibilities. Charles presented the situation to his advisors with characteristic thoughtfulness, outlining both Thomas's qualifications and the family connection involved. He emphasized that this was not a casual request for a ceremonial position, but rather a serious inquiry about meaningful employment in an area where the royal household had legitimate needs. The restoration and maintenance of historic royal properties required specialized expertise, and finding qualified professionals who understood both traditional building techniques and the unique requirements of working within the royal environment was often challenging. The response from his advisors was immediate and unanimous. Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the privy purse, was the first to speak, outlining the financial and administrative complications that could arise from such an appointment. He explained that every position within the royal household was subject to rigorous scrutiny, both from Parliament and the media. Even positions that appeared routine could become sources of controversy if there was any suggestion that personal relationships had influenced hiring decisions. The private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, raised concerns about the precedent such an appointment might establish. He pointed out that the royal household regularly received requests from various family members and friends seeking employment or business opportunities. Granting one such request, even for legitimate reasons, could lead to expectations that similar favors would be provided to others. The floodgates could open to requests from extended family members, friends of the family, and others who might feel entitled to special consideration. Admiral Sir Tony Johnstone-Byrd, who served as master of the household, addressed the practical implications from a management perspective. He explained that introducing someone with such close family connections into the workplace could create uncomfortable dynamics for other staff members. Employees might feel inhibited about raising concerns or providing honest feedback about someone so closely related to the queen consort. This could affect workplace efficiency and morale, potentially creating problems that extended far beyond the individual appointment. The discussion revealed layers of complexity that Charles had anticipated but hoped might be manageable. His advisors painted a picture of potential media coverage that could overshadow any legitimate contributions Thomas might make to royal architectural projects. Headlines about nepotism and favoritism could dominate public discourse, potentially damaging the monarchy's reputation for integrity and fairness. Sir Clive presented examples from previous monarchs who had faced similar situations, noting how even well-intentioned decisions to support family members had sometimes resulted in lasting controversies. He referenced historical cases where royal appointments had been scrutinized for decades, with critics using them as evidence of institutional corruption or inappropriate influence. The modern media environment, with its 24-hour news cycle and social media commentary, would likely amplify such criticisms beyond anything previous generations had experienced. The Keeper of the Privy Purse raised additional concerns about the financial implications of the appointment. Any salary or benefits provided to Thomas would ultimately be funded by public money through the sovereign grant or other royal funding mechanisms. This meant that taxpayers would essentially be supporting the employment of the king's step-nephew, a fact that would certainly be highlighted by Republican critics and fiscal conservatives. Admiral Johnstone Burt addressed the security implications as well, explaining that anyone working within the royal household required extensive background checks and security clearances. While Thomas's family connection provided some assurance about his loyalty and discretion, it also created potential vulnerabilities. His presence within royal residences could attract additional attention from media outlets seeking insider information or personal details about the royal family's private life. The advisors also discussed the potential impact on Thomas himself, suggesting that accepting such a position could actually harm his long-term career prospects. Being known primarily as the king's stepnephew who got a royal job might overshadow his professional accomplishments and make it difficult for him to establish credibility within the architectural community. Future employers might question whether his experience and references were genuine or simply the result of royal patronage. Charles listened carefully to each concern, recognizing the validity of the points being raised while also feeling the weight of disappointing both Camilla and her family. He had hoped that there might be a way to structure an appointment that would address the legitimate concerns while still providing Thomas with an opportunity to develop his career. However, the unanimous opposition from his advisors suggested that the risks far outweighed any potential benefits. The meeting also touched on broader questions about how the monarchy should handle such requests in the future. Sir Clive suggested that it might be helpful to establish clearer guidelines and procedures for family members seeking employment or business opportunities, providing a framework that could be applied consistently and transparently. This could help avoid the appearance of arbitrary decision-making while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. The discussion revealed the isolation that often accompanied royal decision-making. While Charles had the authority to overrule his advisors if he chose, doing so would create tension within his household and potentially expose him to the very criticisms they were warning about. The weight of constitutional monarchy meant that even seemingly personal decisions had to be evaluated through the lens of public interest and institutional integrity. As the meeting concluded, Charles felt the heavy burden of having to choose between family loyalty and constitutional duty. His advisors had presented compelling arguments about the risks and complications involved, but he also understood that his decision would affect real people with genuine hopes and aspirations. Thomas was not seeking special treatment or an easy path. He was simply trying to find meaningful work in a field he was passionate about. The advisors agreed to prepare a formal assessment of the request, including detailed analysis of precedent, legal implications, and potential alternative approaches. This would provide Charles with comprehensive documentation to support whatever decision he ultimately made, ensuring that all relevant factors had been thoroughly considered and evaluated. 3 days later, Charles made his decision. The weight of constitutional responsibility, combined with the unanimous advice of his senior staff, had convinced him that granting Annabelle's request would create more problems than it would solve. However, he was determined to handle the situation with grace and compassion, recognizing that his response would affect not only Thomas's future but also his relationship with Camilla's entire family. Charles decided to write the response personally rather than delegating it to his private secretary. He understood that Annabelle had taken considerable courage to make the request, and she deserved a thoughtful, personal reply from him directly. He spent the better part of a morning crafting the letter, weighing each word carefully to ensure that his message conveyed both his genuine regret and his reasoning for the decision. The letter began with Charles expressing his gratitude for Annabelle's confidence in approaching him about Thomas's situation. He acknowledged the difficulty Thomas was facing in finding employment and recognized the talent and dedication that Annabelle had described. Charles made it clear that his decision was not a reflection of any doubt about Thomas's qualifications or character, but rather a necessary adherence to the constitutional principles that governed royal appointments. Charles explained that the monarchy's credibility depended on maintaining clear boundaries between personal relationships and official responsibilities. While he personally would have been pleased to help Thomas find suitable employment, doing so within the royal household would inevitably raise questions about favoritism and special treatment. These concerns extended beyond immediate media criticism to the fundamental trust that the British people placed in the institution of monarchy. The letter detailed some of the broader implications that his advisors had raised, though Charles was careful to present these concerns as legitimate constitutional considerations rather than personal rejections. He explained that every royal appointment was subject to intense scrutiny, and that even the appearance of nepotism could damage the monarchy's reputation for fairness and integrity. This was not about Thomas specifically, but about the standards that had to be applied consistently to all such situations. However, Charles also included a more personal section in which he expressed his genuine desire to support Thomas in other ways. He suggested that the royal household's extensive network of professional contacts might be able to provide Thomas with introductions to architectural firms that specialized in historic preservation. These connections could lead to legitimate employment opportunities where Thomas could build his career based purely on his merits, without the complications that would arise from direct royal employment. Charles also mentioned that the royal household frequently contracted with external architectural firms for various restoration projects. If Thomas were to establish himself with a reputable company, there might be opportunities for him to work on royal properties in a professional capacity, where his expertise would be valued regardless of his family connections. This approach would allow Thomas to contribute to the preservation of Britain's architectural heritage while maintaining the appropriate professional distance. The letter concluded with Charles's assurance that this decision did not reflect any change in his feelings toward Camilla's family or his commitment to supporting them in appropriate ways. He emphasized that his role as king sometimes required him to make difficult choices that might disappoint people he cared about, but that these decisions were necessary to preserve the integrity of the institution he served. When Charles showed the draft to Camilla, she read it with visible emotion. She understood the reasoning behind the decision and had expected this outcome after their conversations with the advisors. However, seeing the formal rejection in writing made the reality more painful. She worried about how Thomas would receive the news and whether he would understand that the decision was about constitutional necessity rather than personal rejection. Camilla also expressed concern about how to communicate this decision to the rest of her family. Annabelle had likely shared her request with other family members, and they would all be watching to see how Charles responded. The rejection could be interpreted as evidence that despite their warm relationship, Camilla's family would always be treated as outsiders when it came to matters of real importance. Charles and Camilla discussed the timing of sending the letter, eventually deciding that a delay would only make the situation more difficult. Charles wanted to include a personal note to Thomas as well, acknowledging his achievements and expressing confidence in his future success. This additional gesture was intended to soften the impact of the rejection while demonstrating that Charles genuinely cared about Thomas's well-being. The morning Charles sent the letter, the atmosphere in the palace was notably subdued. Word of the decision had spread among the senior staff, many of whom had come to know and appreciate Camilla's family over the years. While they agreed with the constitutional reasoning behind the rejection, they also understood the personal cost involved for both Charles and Camilla. Sir Clive Alderton privately expressed to Charles his admiration for how the situation had been handled, noting that such decisions never became easier despite their constitutional necessity. He shared examples of similar situations from previous reigns, emphasizing that every monarch had faced comparable challenges in balancing personal relationships with official duties. The response from Annabelle came within a week, and it was everything Charles had hoped it might be. She wrote with grace and understanding, acknowledging the constitutional considerations that had influenced his decision. She expressed gratitude for the alternative suggestions he had provided and assured him that Thomas would appreciate both the honest response and the offers of assistance in other forms. Annabelle also included a message from Thomas himself, who had apparently taken the news with maturity and understanding. He expressed his appreciation for Charles's consideration of his situation and his gratitude for the family warmth he had always experienced from both Charles and Camilla. Thomas indicated that he was already pursuing some of the alternative opportunities that Charles had suggested and was optimistic about his future prospects. However, despite the gracious response from Annabelle and Thomas, Charles could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his relationship with Camilla's family. The request and his rejection of it had forced everyone to confront the limitations that royal protocol placed on even the most well-intentioned gestures of support. The invisible barriers between the royal family and their extended relations had been made explicitly visible, and that knowledge could not be easily forgotten. 6 months later, Charles received an unexpected invitation that would bring the consequences of his decision into sharp focus. Thomas had indeed found employment with a prestigious architectural firm specializing in historic preservation, and his first major project was the restoration of a 16th-century manor house that belonged to the National Trust. The project had attracted significant attention within the architectural community, and Thomas had been invited to present his work at a symposium on traditional building techniques. The symposium was being hosted by one of Charles's own charities, the Prince's Foundation, which had long been dedicated to promoting traditional crafts and sustainable building practices. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. Thomas would be presenting his expertise to an audience that included many of the same people who might have been his colleagues had Charles made a different decision about the royal appointment. Charles decided to attend the symposium, both to show support for the foundation's work and, if he were honest with himself, to see how Thomas had fared since their correspondence. Camilla chose to accompany him, though she admitted to feeling nervous about the encounter. Neither of them was certain how Thomas might react to their presence, or whether their attendance might create awkward situations for everyone involved. The venue was the Foundation's campus in Dumfries House, where traditional craftsmen and modern architects regularly gathered to share knowledge and techniques. The setting was perfect for Thomas's presentation, which focused on the challenges of preserving medieval stonework while adapting historic buildings for modern use. As Charles and Camilla took their seats in the lecture hall, they could see Thomas preparing his materials at the front of the room, looking confident and professional. When Thomas began his presentation, it became immediately clear that he had found his calling. He spoke passionately about the restoration project, explaining how his team had discovered original medieval construction techniques hidden beneath centuries of modifications. His slides showed detailed photographs of the painstaking work required to preserve authentic materials while ensuring the building's structural integrity for future generations. The presentation revealed not only Thomas's technical expertise, but also his deep respect for the craftsmen who had originally built the manor house. He spoke eloquently about the importance of understanding historical context when approaching restoration work, emphasizing that successful preservation required both technical skill and cultural sensitivity. His approach aligned perfectly with the principles that Charles had long advocated through his various charitable initiatives. During the question and answer session that followed, Thomas fielded inquiries from seasoned professionals with remarkable poise and knowledge. His responses demonstrated that he had not only mastered the technical aspects of his work, but had also developed the communication skills necessary to advocate for historic preservation in contemporary contexts. Several audience members commented on the sophistication of his approach and the quality of his research. As the presentation concluded, Charles felt a complex mixture of pride and regret. He was genuinely pleased to see Thomas thriving in his chosen career, clearly making meaningful contributions to the field of historic preservation. The young man had proven that his talents were real and that he could succeed based on his merits alone. However, Charles also could not help but wonder what contributions Thomas might have made to royal preservation projects had circumstances been different. During the reception that followed the symposium, Thomas approached Charles and Camilla with obvious nervousness, but also evident maturity. He thanked Charles for attending his presentation and for the advice that had led him to his current position. Thomas explained that the rejection of his original request had actually motivated him to prove himself in the broader architectural community, and He now felt more confident in his abilities than he might have if he had been given a position within the royal household. The conversation revealed how much Thomas had grown during the preceding months. He spoke about the challenges he had faced in establishing credibility within his firm and the satisfaction he felt in earning recognition for his work. He also expressed gratitude for the professional introductions that Charles had facilitated, several of which had led to valuable networking opportunities and potential future projects. Thomas also shared his perspective on the original situation, demonstrating a mature understanding of the constitutional considerations that had influenced Charles's decision. He acknowledged that he had initially been disappointed by the rejection, but had come to appreciate that building his career independently would ultimately be more fulfilling and sustainable. Working within the royal household might have protected him from some challenges, but it also would have limited his ability to establish himself as a credible professional in his own right. The conversation extended to broader topics about the future of historic preservation and the challenges facing young professionals in the field. Thomas spoke enthusiastically about his hopes for developing innovative approaches to conservation that could address modern environmental concerns while respecting historical authenticity. His vision aligned remarkably well with Charles's own interests in sustainable architecture and traditional building methods. As the evening progressed, other attendees approached to congratulate Thomas on his presentation and to discuss potential collaborations. Charles observed these interactions with growing appreciation for the young man's professional development and social skills. Thomas handled each conversation with appropriate confidence while remaining genuinely interested in learning from more experienced colleagues. The drive back to the palace that evening was quieter than usual, with both Charles and Camilla reflecting on what they had witnessed. Camilla expressed her pride in her nephew's accomplishments while also acknowledging that Charles had made the right decision months earlier. She had seen how Thomas carried himself as an independent professional, and she understood that this confidence might not have developed if he had been given a position based on family connections. Charles found himself thinking about the broader implications of the evening's events. The symposium had demonstrated that traditional approaches to difficult decisions sometimes led to better outcomes than more accommodating alternatives might have provided. Thomas's success served as evidence that constitutional principles, however rigid they might sometimes seem, often served important purposes beyond their immediate political implications. The experience also reinforced Charles's understanding of the delicate balance required in modern monarchy. While he could not use his position to provide direct employment to family members, he could and should continue to support causes and institutions that created opportunities for talented individuals to develop their skills and contribute to society. The Prince's Foundation had provided exactly the kind of platform where Thomas could showcase his abilities and connect with potential collaborators. In the weeks that followed, Charles received updates about Thomas's continued success. The young architect had been invited to join a major restoration project for a historic cathedral, and his expertise was being sought by other National Trust properties. His career trajectory suggested that he would indeed become a significant contributor to the field of historic preservation, achieving success that was clearly based on his professional merits rather than his family connections. The entire experience had taught Charles valuable lessons about the long-term wisdom of constitutional constraints, even when they required making difficult personal decisions. Sometimes the most supportive action was to maintain appropriate boundaries, allowing talented individuals to prove themselves through their own efforts rather than providing shortcuts that might ultimately undermine their credibility and self-confidence.